Oh, welcome back. Welcome to week 2. This week we're going to be moving on to a different topic. We're going to talk about muscular strength and endurance. Let's start off by just defining what those two terms are. When we talk about muscular strength, it's determined by how much force you can move or lift with a single motion. So it's typically measured by what we refer to as a 1RM or a 1 repetition max. You can think of it functionally like how much weight could you lift one single time. With one motion, what's the most amount of weight you could lift in that particular motion? Muscular endurance is another form of muscle action or muscle strength, but it is at the different end of the spectrum. So instead of how much can I lift in one single movement, it's how many times can I do the same movement before experiencing fatigue. So how many times can you do the same motion over and over again before you experience fatigue? Functionally, you might think about this one more in lines of asking yourself, like, how many push-ups can I do? How many sit-ups can I do? How fast could I run a mile? How long would it take me to swim a mile? Those repetitive or repeating the same motion over and over again without fatigue, that's building muscle endurance. Now, typically in our training programs, we can work on building one during an activity or the other, but most of the time we can't work on building both strength and endurance at the same time. So it's really when you start to think about your own programming and you start to create your own workout schedules, there's going to be a lot that varies based off of what your individual goals are. What do you want to be able to accomplish? Let's continue with some more basic concepts. Let's define the two terms atrophy and hypertrophy. So these two terms help us to understand what's happening within muscles so that we can better understand a little bit strength and endurance programming when it comes time for you to make decisions. Now, these two terms, atrophy and hypertrophy, are really more oriented towards your lifelong fitness. Atrophy, as you can see on the screen there, is a term that means the decrease in muscle size. And when our muscles start to atrophy or get smaller and smaller, it functionally means that we don't have as much strength or we're losing our endurance. So our muscles becoming less and less functional if they're atrophying. You're probably most familiar with this concept with the catchphrase, use it or lose it. So when we think about this class extending its benefits beyond just the semester, this is one of those big areas, along with some of the other contributions we're going to see to your health. This is one of the big areas that we're really hoping you will choose to adapt an active lifestyle lifelong to help to avoid things like atrophy. On the other side of that, if you are doing resistance training, if you are doing strength or endurance work consistently, you're going to see your muscles enter a state called hypertrophy. So now this means an increase in muscle size. It only happens though if we're really challenging ourselves to push our muscles to use them at a higher level than we are traditionally. So I'm trying to push myself into that fatigue zone, not just stopping when it starts to get uncomfortable. I'm really challenging myself to lift weight that is really heavy for me, more repetitions than I did in the past to try and increase my strength. Hypertrophy only happens after long duration of challenging yourself to improve, just like atrophy only happens after fairly long durations of just not being active. So these are more terms that contribute to your lifelong health rather than week-to-week immediate health. If we go on with basic concepts, and now we're looking at both slow twitch and fast twitch muscle fibers, these are two distinctions about how your muscles are actually composed or what they're comprised of. Muscles are made up of both of these types of fibers, slow twitch and fast twitch. Slow twitch are both slow to get tired, they're slow to fatigue, but they're also really pretty slow at building up their energy or building up their output. So they will contribute force, but these are much more like endurance type. Any activity that you're doing more repetitions but at a lower weight because you can't move that weight really quickly, that so you're looking more at a slow twitch muscle fibers as they're being recruited more heavily. If you're doing something that's really fast or that's requiring a lot of power really quickly, so you might think of going up for a rebound or jumping for a spike in volleyball. You can think of any of your power lifts where you're really lifting heavier weight. All of those, if you're think about sprinting, all of those really quick type motions, those are relying much more heavily on this other type of muscle fiber, fast twitch muscle fibers. So even when you start thinking about your goals and start setting up your own programming, how you choose to be active and how you choose to set your weight training program is going to influence whether you are training more your slow twitch fibers or you're training more your fast twitch fibers. So, your goal, knowing what your own goals are, is really important to making an effective weight training program that matches what you want to accomplish. I did want to bring up, as we were talking about the fast twitch muscle fibers, you've seen on the sign-up sheets in week 1, you saw the physical fitness tests you're going to be going through and that you have to complete by week 3. Later in the semester, we're also going to be having you complete a Wingate test. Now, a Wingate test is one that's going to dominantly rely on your fast twitch muscle fibers. So it'll be different from the other activities that you've done for your fitness testing here at the beginning of the semester, which rely a little bit more on slow twitch fibers. We're going to have one test that definitely targets those fast twitch fibers and see what your performance level is for that. Let's look at some of the benefits of strength training. So when we look at the benefits of strength training, any of the athletes in our class are going to recognize if I can get stronger and if I can increase my endurance, then it's going to improve my speed, it's going to improve my power, it's going to improve my overall athletic performance. Hopefully it's going to make it a more enjoyable time on the field, and hopefully it's going to lead to more wins on the field as well. But if you're an athlete, the improvement of performance is an important one. But we're interested in lifelong fitness, not just in immediate this semester improvements. So we're really hoping that you're going to adopt lifelong healthy habits. So what are some of the benefits if we continue to be engaged in resistance types training across a lifespan? Well, injury prevention is a really big one for you to recognize. If you are keeping yourself active, you are building up the strength and endurance or resistance ability, you're getting stronger muscles, you're getting stronger tendons, you're actually increasing the strength of the bones, and all of those things allow you to decrease the risk of you getting hurt or injured later on. But it means that you also have to stay active across the lifespan. It's not that I can be active for 1 month and then I'm good for a year, or that if I was active when I was young, I'll be fine as I age. That's not the way that our bodies function. You can see on the slide another major benefit of strength training or resistance training is improved body composition. So if I remain active, then I'm going to retain muscle tissue for longer. It's also true that muscle tissue, when it's inactive, does burn slightly more calories than adipose tissue or fat tissue. So if I am maintaining a good, healthy body composition, then I am going to burn more calories even at rest, and that helps to maintain or helps to influence what my body composition is across my lifespan. But again, if you're not using those muscles, then they are going to start to atrophy. They're going to start to disappear. As we change slides and look at the next set here of benefits, you can see lifetime muscle and bone health is listed there. We've really hit that a little bit in the discussion on the previous slide. We will, especially by doing weight-bearing activities where our own body weight and any weight that we're adding through resistance, whether we're lifting dumbbells or barbells or whatever it may be, that extra force being transferred through the bones increases the strength and the density of the bone and really helps to reduce the risk of injury. You see the term sarcopenia on there, which in parentheses has the term atrophy. We already covered what atrophy is. Sarcopenia is essentially the same thing. You can think of it as a synonymous term. It's just the medical condition of atrophy. So as we age, there's this natural progression or natural decline in muscle tissue. It's not a guarantee though. So it's not as you age, you're guaranteed to lose this much by this year, and this much by this year, and this much by this year. It's really very heavily dependent on how active you choose to be. So you have undoubtedly seen individuals that were that you considered to be older or significantly older that you thought were really unhealthy, and you probably also have met ones that you thought they were really healthy. And a lot of that comes to not only their activity level, but their dietary choices, which we'll look at later in the semester. Osteoporosis is listed there, probably the term that is most familiar to you off of that slide. And again, that has to do with bone health. So by staying active and doing resistance type training, building up your strength, building up your muscular endurance, then you can also reduce the risk of osteoporosis, which is just the loss of bone mass across the aging process. So weight training really can improve nearly every tissue in the body. Even nerves begin to fire faster if we're engaged in consistent weight training. So as we move into the next slide, it mentions chronic disease prevention is another of the major benefits, and one that is really, really important when we're thinking about the lifelong benefits of adopting healthy habits. Strength training has been shown to reduce the risk of diabetes, of heart disease, of high blood pressure. Consistently and across your lifespan, weight training will give you multiple benefits in multiple very important ways that maybe you don't think much about right now, or you don't value as much right now. But in time, if you can establish this as a habit now, you will reap the benefits for a long time to come if you stay involved with it. So when we talk about strength training, one of the terms I wanted to have you aware of was that idea of isotonic exercises. So this just means muscle contractions that are working against a force. It helps us to understand the idea of resistance training. When you are practicing and doing your lifts across this semester, remember, I need you to be active at least 3 days a week. That doesn't have to be in the weight room lifting weights all 3 days, or doesn't have to be on a treadmill running all 3 days. But for this class, you need to be committed to being active for 3 days a week. We're talking this week about strength training or muscular strength and muscular endurance, so we're going to give you some examples of what a 3-day week might look like. But when you're doing your lifts, I want you to be focused on building the habit of doing every lift through the full functional range of motion, through the full natural range of motion. So probably the best example, the one that's easiest to sort of visualize in your own mind, is that of doing pull-ups. I want to make sure when I'm doing my pull-ups that I'm allowing myself to come to full extension of the arm. Then I'm going to come and pull back up on that bar, as opposed to only allowing myself to lower halfway before I pull back up. I want you to practice with every lift the habit of going through a full natural range of motion. This is just going to build up your dynamic stability and your functional fitness across a lifespan. So I want to introduce you to the FIT principle. FIT principle is an acronym with each of the letters standing for a specific decision point or influence point when you're setting up some of your own programming. We're talking about muscular strength and endurance, so let's take a look first here. The FIT principle, FIT stands for F for frequency, I for intensity, T for time, and the second T for type. When we think about muscular strength and endurance or resistance type training, for a frequency, how often should we be doing it? We want to be doing this 2 or 3 days a week as a beginning lifter. If you're a more advanced lifter, you can begin to increase that. But for a beginning lifter, which is where we're assuming we're all starting, we're looking at lifting 2 to 3 days a week, and they're non-consecutive, as you see there. So that might mean that you're choosing to do your weight training or weight lifting on Monday and Thursday, or maybe Monday and Friday. Or if you want to do 3 days a week, that Monday, Wednesday, Friday is a nice even split to kind of keep some separation. But we need time for the body to recover and repair so that you can continue to see improvements as you continue to invest your time. The I stands for intensity. And how hard are we supposed to be lifting? How hard are we supposed to be working to improve our muscular strength and endurance? Now on the slide, you see a little bit of variation. You actually see quite a bit of variation there. It says between 50 and 90% of your 1 repetition max. Now we talked about what that 1 repetition max was already. What's the most amount of weight you can lift with one single motion? If we think about a bench press, which is probably something you're more familiar with, what's the most amount of weight that you can lift with one lift of the bar, and then you could not do that lift, you could not do that same weight again? We don't actually want you, I don't actually want you trying to find out what your 1 RM is as a beginning lifter. I don't want you with the heaviest weight that you can above you or that you're trying to move. There are ways to estimate your 1 RM. There are protocols that you can find on TikTok, that you can find on the internet, that you can find on YouTube, that will show you how to estimate or predict what your 1 RM is using a 10 repetition or a 6 repetition or a 3 repetition by lifting a weight multiple times and getting to the point where this is the most I can lift that weight. I can't do any more weight if I'm looking at that 10 repetition max. I was able to lift this weight, but I could get to 10, but I'm sure I couldn't get to 11 and keep proper form. That information you can use. They'll give you an algorithm or an equation to be able to predict what your 1 RM is. But why such a variation? Why between 50 and 90%? Well, that comes and is going to show up when we look at our examples of programming for somebody whose goals were more towards endurance, and another example of somebody whose goals were much more towards strength. So if our goal is more towards endurance, we're going to lift more times, but a much lighter weight, more like the 50% of what is our max. If our goals are really to develop strength, power, speed, then we want to be looking at the other end of the spectrum. We want to move that weight fewer times, but we want it to be a much heavier weight. So that's why you see that variation in there. Time, you see on the slide, you can see we're going to be describing our lifting with 2 terms, that of sets and reps. When we talk about repetitions, that's referring to how many times in a row do I do the same motion. So here I'm sort of mimicking the idea of doing a bench press, although I'm standing vertically. If I'm doing a bench press, maybe a bicep curl would be better. As I go through and I lift that 1, 2, 3 times, so that's 3 reps. I've done that same motion repeatedly a certain number of times. I stop, take a break. That was 1 set of 3 reps. Then I might come back and do another set, 1, 2, 3. There's a second set of 3 reps. So when you hear and see stuff within the course that's talking about sets and reps, that's what those 2 terms are trying to represent. And it's the most common way that we describe our involvement within resistance training. Type, what kinds of activities are you going to be doing? In this class for beginning lifters, I'm really interested in seeing you focus first on large muscle groups. Focus on legs, focus on your chest, focus on your shoulders and back. Focus on really large muscle groups. Once you've developed a base of strength in those areas, that's when it would be more appropriate to start building in smaller and smaller muscle groups. So, let me show you an example workout here that we've written up for somebody whose goals were around muscular endurance. Excuse me. You can see their warm-up, and I always want you to make sure you've got a warm-up included. Their warm-up is including 5 or 10 minutes of light activity, whether that's jogging or using the elliptical or whatever. For this mock or pretend individual, I have them doing some core strength exercises, and you can see some of that nomenclature. They're doing 2 sets of between 10 and 20 weighted sit-ups. So they're doing sit-ups, but they're holding a weight to add some more resistance to that. They're going to do it as many as they can between 10 and 20 repetitions. They'll take a break. They'll do that a second time for between 10 and 20 repetitions to work on some core strength. You see I have some stability work set up for them. They're going to be doing some single leg Romanian deadlifts. You can see that nomenclature in there again. But let's move into the primary exercises. This is where I really want to get your attention sort of focused. This and the regional to some extent, but the primary exercises I think best highlight the distinctions that we're making between muscular endurance as a goal and muscular strength as a goal. So for this person in our primary exercises, I have them working on some arms. They're going to be doing either the bench or the incline press. But you can see, remember they're working on endurance. They're doing 3 sets of 12 repetitions. They're going to do that same motion 12 times in a row, take a break, do it another 12 times in a row, take a break, Another 12 times in a row, take a break. That's 3 sets of 12. Well, if I'm doing 12 repetitions, I'm moving that weight a whole bunch of times, I'm not going to be able to lift a really heavy weight. So for this person, they're doing about 55% of whatever their max is, about half of whatever their max is. For legs, I have them doing squats or step-ups or a deadlift. Any of those would work on legs. But again, you see that same nomenclature. About 3 sets, not about, 3 sets of 12 repetitions at 55% of their max RM. For regional exercises, you can read for yourself what's on their shoulders, back, and legs are all included in there. You can also see that they're doing 3 sets of 10 repetitions. Relatively high numbers of repetitions because their goal is around endurance. And then I always want you to have a cool down. They're going to have some dynamic stretch or dynamic and static stretching as part of their cool down. So let's take a look at somebody who's interested in strength though. Here's our next slide. Now you'll notice this example workout is focused on a person who's interested in developing their strength. Warm-up looks similar, 5 to 10 minutes of light activity, whether it's jogging or elliptical. I have them working on some core and some stability at the beginning. The actual exercises have changed a little bit, but that's not because they're focused on strength. It was just so there would be a little variation in the example. Look at the primary exercises though. This is where I wanted your attention at most last time, right? They're going to be working on arms and legs. I have them for their arms doing bench or incline press. Exactly the same as what we had the endurance athlete doing. The exact same motion, but the difference is highlighted here in how heavy are they lifting and how many times are they lifting that weight. So now they're still doing 3 sets, but they're only doing 3 repetitions. And look at, because we're only lifting that weight 3 times, that's going to be a much heavier weight that we're lifting to try and build that strength. So they're doing 3 sets of 3 repetitions at 90% of their 1RM, nearly the most that they can lift at a single time. And they're going to do it 3 times in a row to try and keep pushing their own strength. Legs, again, you're seeing the same exact motions as before. Squats, step-ups, deadlifts, all of them would work legs. The difference is not in the motion that they're doing. The difference is in how they've programmed that motion. I have them set up, this hypothetical person set up for 3 sets of 3 repetitions at 90% of their 1RM. The regional exercises, they're working on shoulders, back, and legs, just like we saw endurance athletes doing. The activities may be slightly different, as I just wanted a little bit of variation, but the bigger difference there is that we're seeing a slightly lower number of repetitions in there. And then they have a cool down. Remember, I always want you to have a cool down. So, as we've covered the concepts of muscular strength and endurance, shown you a little bit about how the differences between your own unique goals would influence how you make decisions about how you work out, I hope we've answered questions or brought to light a little bit of the new terms and that they came across in a way that you understood them. I'm glad you were here. I look forward to seeing you next week as well. Have a great week.